unreeled. Vintage recordings of fiction recovered from discontinued physical media.
A Midsummer Night's Dream. The story of A Midsummer Night's Dream is from Shakespeare's own imagination. Like all dreams, it is a mixture of real events and fantasy. It tells us about love and marriage, dreams and reality, and the merry dance that love leads us. The play takes place in Athens, a city in Greece, which is ruled over by Theseus, a hero of ancient Greek legend. Celebrations are in the air, for Theseus is about to be married. At his royal court we learn of 4 young people in a love tangle. 2 boys, Lysander and Demetrius, love the same girl, Hermia. A second girl, Helena, loves Demetrius. Hermia will not marry Demetrius as her father demands, and flees to a wood outside the city, followed by the other 3. We know, since the play is a comedy, that all will end happily. The entertainment and humour come from seeing how Shakespeare matches and rematches the young couples until the right pairing of Hermia and Lysander and Helena and Demetrius is at last achieved. In the woodland glades we leave the real world and enter the magical realm of fairyland, where King Oberon and his queen Titania hold sway. The 2 have quarrelled, and to spite his wife, Oberon has a spell put on her. He orders the mischievous sprite Puck to put the same spell on Demetrius for spurning Helena. But Puck, of course, puts the spell on the wrong boy. Meanwhile, into the wood troops a band of workmen who plan to put on a play for Theseus's wedding. Their choice is a tragic tale of doomed young love called Pyramus and Thisbe. This becomes riotous comedy when acted by Bottom the Weaver and his friends. Shakespeare was a professional actor, so maybe he was poking good-humoured fun at these worthy amateurs. Perhaps he remembered plays he had seen as a boy in Stratford-upon-Avon, which were performed by craftsmen like these: tailors, weavers, carpenters, joiners, tinkers, and bellows-menders. Bottom is one of Shakespeare's richest comic characters. He is a puffed-up know-all who behaves like an ass, and is turned into one, or at least given the head of one, by Puck. And the spell that has been put on Titania makes her, the fairy queen, fall in love with him. The spell of enchantment weaves its work in sleep. When humans and fairy queen wake, they experience love at first sight, and what muddle and confusion that causes. Only more magic can put things right. Bottom, released from the spell, knows that wondrous things have happened, but as with most dreams, he can neither fully remember them nor explain them. Nor can the lovers, who return to court in time for the wedding. They watch the workmen act their play before Theseus and his bride. Few scenes in Shakespeare are funnier than this play within a play. A farewell from the fairies ends the play. Puck reminds us that his world includes not only peaseblossom, cobweb and mustard seed, the pretty fairies who attend on Titania, but also spirits like himself, who can cause mischief and harm. In Shakespeare's day, people believed in spells and magic and charms to ward off evil. A Midsummer Night's Dream was probably first acted in 1595, perhaps for the wedding of one of Queen Elizabeth's courtiers. It would have been performed in a private house and then later staged for the general public. Shakespeare was living in London when he wrote the play, but he was brought up in the country and must have remembered the fairy tales and country legends that he heard as a boy. Recalling them, he concocted a magical and dreamlike world, full of rich poetry and musical sounds that have enchanted audiences ever since.
A Midsummer Night's Dream. Hermia, who was small, dark and perfect, loved Lysander, and Lysander loved Hermia. What could have been better than that? At the same time, Helena, who was tall, fair and tearful, loved Demetrius. But Demetrius did not love Helena. Instead, he too loved Hermia, who did not love him. What could have been worse than that? Now, although Lysander and Demetrius were both young, handsome and rich, so that to the untouched heart and the uncomplicated eye there was nothing to choose between them, Hermia's father had made a choice. He had chosen Demetrius, and such was the harsh law of Athens, where they all lived, that Hermia had to obey her father and marry Demetrius, or be shut up in a nunnery for the rest of her life. So Hermia was in despair, Lysander was in torment, Demetrius was triumphant, and Helena, loving and unloved, wept like a willow over a stream of her own making. It was a pitiable state of affairs, and it could not have been better put than by Lysander, who declared that the course of true love never did run smooth. But nonetheless run it did, on eager, fearful feet, to a certain wood not far from the town. There, in the moon-washed time of night, Lysander and Hermia planned to meet and fly to some distant place where they would be safe from the cruel Athenian law. All would have been well, had not Hermia, warm-hearted, confiding Hermia, told Helena, who was her longest, dearest friend. Helena, more doleful than ever, and hoping for no more than a glance of gratitude and a rag of his company, played the tell-tale and told Demetrius of the flight. Demetrius was outraged. He rushed off to the wood, meaning to win Hermia's heart by plunging his sword into Lysander's, and after him went Helena in despairing pursuit. Nor were these love-tangled four the only ones who went to the wood upon that midsummer's night, for no man, not even a lover, can have the world to himself. 6 good men and true, 6 solid workmen of Athens, engaged to meet there in secret. They were to rehearse a play for the festivities of Duke Theseus's marriage to Hippolyta, once his enemy, but soon to be his love. Very serious was their business, for if their play was chosen, they would all be given pensions, and stand high in the esteem of their fellow workmen in the town. The play, as was right for a wedding, was of lovers. So the 6 good men and true, with their heads full of passions and pensions, went to the wood, where already in thicket and clearing there was love in earnest and love in despair. It was a strange wood, as huge, dark and mysterious as a man's mind. It was haunted, and by more than spinning spiders, beetles, hedgehogs, and softly gliding spotted snakes. There were other personages who flickered among the shadows, darted across moonbeams, hung in the beating air, and pursued mysterious affairs of their own. Ill met, by moonlight, proud Titania. Oberon, dread king of the night. Shadowy, formidable, with train of goblins, sprites, and elves, and with Puck, his grinning, mocking henchman by his side, stepped suddenly into the moonshine and stood, a dark threat in a silver world. Over and against him, caught in brightness with delicate foot unplaced, Titania, his queen, drew back with hands upraised in anger. What? Jealous Oberon? Fairy, skip hence. I have forsworn his bed and company. Strange quarrel between these powerful rulers of the nighttime world. Titania had as her attendant a changeling Indian boy that Oberon desired for himself. But Oberon's request had been denied and his command scorned. So there was discord in the world of spirits, no less than in the world of men. In consequence, the very seasons had been disturbed. Killing frosts and drowning floods had spoiled the spring and bewildered the summer, for a quarrel between so dangerous a king and so wild a queen made a sickness in nature herself. "Do you amend it, then? It lies in you," accused Oberon. "I do but beg a little changeling boy." "Not for thy fairy kingdom," vowed Titania, and with her gossamer train attending swept from the glade, leaving her shadowy lord to brood angrily on his disappointment. "Well, go thy way," he murmured at length. "Thou shalt not from this grove till I torment thee for this injury." Presently, the notion of a strange revenge came into his ranging thoughts. There was, he knew, a certain purple flower that grew far, far away in the west that was possessed of an uncanny power. If the juice of this flower was dropped upon sleeping eyelids, then the sleeper, on awakening, would fall wildly, madly in love with the very next living creature, be it lion, bear, wolf, or monkey, no matter how vile, that the magically anointed eyes beheld. "Fetch me this herb," commanded Oberon to Puck, his lurking henchman, "and be thou here again, ere the Leviathan can swim a league." "I'll put a girdle round about the earth," promised Puck, a prick-eared child with a crooked grin, whose chief delight was fright and confusion, "in 40 minutes." And off he sped like a wicked arrow from his dreadmaster's side. Lost in thought, the king awaited his servant's return until suddenly the murmuring quiet of the wood was disturbed. There came a violent crashing and rending and gasping and panting as of wild beasts lost and confused. At once the brooding king drew the night about him like a cloak and became no more than the shadow of a shadow. The commotion burst out into the pooled moonlight and made it shake. "I love thee not, therefore pursue me not." It was the furious Demetrius with Helena wailing hopelessly in his wake. "Hence, get thee gone and follow me no more." Her tale-bearing had done her no good. Instead of her lover's company, she'd gained only the sight of his avoiding back, and instead of his gratitude, she'd had only his shoulder-flung abuse. But still she pursued him, weeping and sobbing her love. "I am your spaniel," she wailed, "and Demetrius, the more you beat me, I will fawn on you. Use me but as your spaniel," she pleaded. "Only give me leave, unworthy as I am, to follow you." "I am sick when I do look on thee," shouted Demetrius, feeling unwanted love at his heels like a stone in his shoe. "And I am sick when I look not on you," sobbed Helena. "Let me go," cried Demetrius, wild only to find Hermia and kill Lysander. "Or if thou follow me, do not believe but I shall do thee mischief in the wood." But Helena was past caring. So far gone was she in love that custom, modesty, and maidenly restraint were but as specks on the horizon, and remembered only with a pang. "We should be wooed," she wept, "and were not made to woo." Demetrius escaped, and Helena, with a doleful cry, plunged after. The glade stood empty of all save moonlight and the memory of distress. Then Oberon became visible, as if in the thinning of a mist. "Fare thee well, nymph," he murmured, gazing after the broken-hearted lady. "Ere he do leave this grove, thou shalt fly him, and he shall seek thy love." As he stood meditating on how this reversal might be brought about, Puck returned breathlessly to his side, holding out the little purple flower. Oberon's eyes glittered mysteriously as he took it. "I know a bank where the wild thyme blows," he whispered, as his fancy brought it before his mind's eye. "There sleeps Titania some time of the night." Dreamily, he crushed the flower between his pale fingers so that its liquor ran into a cup held out by the eager Puck. "And with the juice of this I'll streak her eyes and make her full of hateful fantasies." He smiled vengefully, and then, remembering the distress that had passed so recently before his invisible eyes, he bade Puck take a little of the juice and anoint the eyes of the scornful youth, so that when he waked, he should dote to distraction on the tall, fair, tearful lady who had so unavailingly pursued him. "Thou shalt know the man," he instructed, "by the Athenian garments he hath on." "Fear not, my lord," assured Puck. "Your servant shall do so." Now the wood was quiet and folded in night, and the moon's dream self drifted among mirrored branches in stream and pool. The two wanderers, dark master and quick servant, crept among the shadowy trees, each with his portion of the charmed liquor, the one to make love run mad, the other to make love run smooth and prosperous to life's end. First, Oberon found what he sought, and while Titania slumbered and her drowsy sentinels nodded at their posts, he streaked her sleeping eyes with the purple flower's juice. "What thou seest when thou dost wake," he breathed, "do it for thy true love take. Wake when some vile thing is near." He left her sleeping, and so cloaked and canopied in the garments of nature that the youth and the girl who came into the glade soon after saw nothing but leaves and flowers. But then they never looked to see a sleeping queen, for they had eyes only for each other. Hermia and Lysander, those dear lovers in perfect accord, were weary from walking and were lost. "We'll rest us, Hermia," proposed Lysander, "if you think it good." "Be it so, Lysander," agreed small dark Hermia with a downward cast of her eyes. "Find you out a bed, for I upon this bank will rest my head." "One turf shall serve as pillow for us both," said Lysander, with a tenderness that filled sweet Hermia with grave misgivings. "Nay, good Lysander, for my sake, my dear, lie further off yet. Do not lie so near." Fervently, Lysander protested that his intentions were most honourable, and urged his lovely Hermia to reconsider her unkind decision, but Hermia shook her head. "Lie further off, in human modesty," she insisted with gentle reproach. "Such separation, as may well be said, becomes a virtuous bachelor and a maid. So far be distant, and good night, sweet friend." Lysander sighed, but deferring to his lady, found himself a bed some little way removed, and presently the lovers, united in spirit though divided in flesh, closed their eyes in sleep. So they lay when Puck found them, and, surprised and vexed to see so much distance between them, instantly took them for the youth and the girl he had been told to find. "This is he, my master said, despised the Athenian maid. And hear the maiden sleeping sound on the dank and dirty ground," the goblin cried indignantly. "Pretty soul! She durst not lie near this lack love, this kill courtesy." Straightway, and without another thought, he anointed Lysander's closed eyes with the charmed juice, and returned to Oberon well pleased with his success. No sooner had he departed than calamity came into the glade. It came with a rush and a cry and a moan and a wail. It came in the shape of doleful Helena, chivied by bush and fingered by briar, with her gown in as many tatters and shreds as her heart. She paused, panting for breath. She had lost Demetrius, and knew not where to turn. "But who is here?" she cried. "Lysander on the ground?" She rushed and knelt beside him, hanging her anxious face above his, like a sad moon with lips, eyes, and streaming silken hair. "Lysander, if you live, good sir, awake!" He awoke, opened his bewitched eyes, saw Helena, for there was little else within his scope, and loved her madly as he had never loved before. Shocked beyond measure, Helena drew back, reminded Lysander that it was Hermia he loved. "Not Hermia, but Helena I love," cried Lysander, "who will not change a raven for a dove." And he poured out so wild a torrent of passion that Helena quailed before it, and thought herself to be most unkindly mocked. "Oh, that a lady of one man refused," she sobbed, "should of another therefore be abused." And she fled from the clearing, dismayed. Lysander, seeing the sleeping Hermia, wondered how he could ever have loved her. "Hermia," he cried, but softly, for he did not want to awaken her. "Sleep thou there, and never mayest thou come Lysander near." Then off he rushed in pursuit of Helena, who pursued Demetrius, who in his turn pursued Hermia, who lay sleeping and abandoned, with nothing for company but troubled dreams. She awoke, and called out for Lysander. There was no answer. She looked. The glade was empty. She called again. "Lysander? Lord? What? Out of hearing? Gone? No sound? No word?" She trembled. She shook. She cried out in terror, and then, like Helena before her, fled from the clearing dismayed. The glade was still, and the troubled moonlight calm again, so that the disturbed bushes and shaken leaves were restored to skilful silverware. Oberon's queen still slept upon her secret couch. Her magically anointed eyes had yet to open. "Are we all met?" came a plain, sturdy voice. "Pat, pat," came another. "And here's a marvellous convenient place for our rehearsal." The 6 good men and true, the 6 worthy workmen of Athens, clumped into the moonlight glade, paused, and peered thoughtfully about them. "This green plot shall be our stage," decided Peter Quince, a carpenter by trade. He was the most scholarly of the company and was to produce the play. The parts had been given out, and all was now to go forward exactly as it would be before the Duke. That is, if their play was chosen. Peter Quince! Nick Bottom the weaver spoke up, and everybody paid attention. Among every company of men there is always one to be reckoned with, one that it is good to have on your side, one whose abilities mark him out as a mine of intellect and a tower of strength. Such a man was Bottom the weaver, large, big-faced, and with little eyes ringed round with red, as if to emphasize their importance. He was down for Pyramus in the play, which was the lover's part and the most important, for none but Bottom could have undertaken it. He might have played Thisbe, the lady, with equal success. He might have played the lion who frightened poor Thisbe away. He might have played any or all of the other parts, for he had a genius for each of them, as everyone agreed. But he had to play Pyramus, for none but Bottom could have undertaken it. Without Bottom, there could be no Pyramus, and without Pyramus there could be no play. The whole enterprise was founded on Bottom, and without a Bottom it would have fallen through. Peter Quince, what sayest thou, bully Bottom? Bottom had a great deal to say, and all of it good sturdy sense. He had discovered that Pyramus, in the play, was to kill himself, which would distress the ladies in their audience to such an extent that the hoped-for pensions might well be in peril. Everyone nodded wisely and looked to Bottom for a solution. They were not disappointed. "Write me a prologue," said Bottom, "to say we will do no harm with our swords, and that Pyramus is not killed indeed. Tell them that I, Pyramus, am not Pyramus, but Bottom the weaver. This will put them out of fear." He smiled, and everyone looked relieved. Truly was Bottom a man of infinite resource, and a very present help in time of need. So the rehearsal went forward, with tireless assistance from Bottom, who was never at a loss to improve the play. With all solemnity, the 6 good men and true transformed themselves into ardent lovers, a ravening lion, and a patient wall, for a wall was required and there was none nearby, and Peter Quince, with book in hand, sometimes admiring, sometimes critical, guided the progress of the play. But Peter Quince was not the only auditor, or for that matter, the only critic of the proceedings. "What hempen homespuns have we swaggering here, so near the cradle of the fairy queen?" Puck, lurking among leaves, peered out at the worthy workman's solemn antics. He grinned crookedly, and his eyes glittered like spots of dew. "I'll meet thee, Pyramus, at Ninny's tomb," announced Francis Flute, the bellows mender, who, though he had a beard coming and was bashful about it, played the Lady Thisbe. "Ninus tomb, man," cried Peter Quince crossly. "Why, you must not speak that yet. That you answered a Pyramus." Then, losing patience with Flute, who, though Ernest was slow of learning, accused him bitterly. "You speak all your part at once, cues and all." He shook his head and sighed. Come what would to try him, the play must go on. "Pyramus, enter," he called. "Your cue is past." Bottom, who had retired within a hawthorn brake, stepped forth with that mixture of modesty and expectation that marks the well-graced actor, who knows that all eyes will be upon him, and the rest of the company ignored. His expectations were answered. All eyes were most certainly upon him, and to a bulging extent. His companions stared, glared, shook, trembled, turned white, turned grey, and most precipitantly fled. Bottom, surprised, could make nothing of it. He shook his head. Peter Quince returned briefly and timorously. He stared at Bottom, appalled. "Bless thee, Bottom, bless thee! Thou art translated!" Then he retired again in melancholy terror. Bottom frowned, and looked down upon himself to see what cause there was for dismay. None. There were his own stout arms, his own good stomach, his own sturdy legs that ended up, as might have been expected, in his own large, familiar boots. All that he could see was as it should have been, and proper to Bottom. It was only what he saw with that was not. From the neck down, he was Bottom the Weaver. From the neck up, he was a monster. While he had waited in the hawthorn brake, listening for his cue, Puck had touched his broad brow and made it harsh and hairy, had touched his nose and made it a muzzle, had touched his ears and made them grow. In short, he had clapped upon the shoulders of the unsuspecting Bottom the sickening head of an ass. "I see their knavery," said Bottom, by way of a dignified reproof to his departed companions. "This is to make an ass of me." He walked up and down and began to sing in a loud voice to keep up his spirits. He was divided between mystification and anger over the behaviour of his friends, for he, no more than any man, could see that he had a donkey's head. Puck watched with rare delight, and guided the weaver's steps nearer and nearer to the bed of the Fairy Queen. Suddenly she awoke, and opened her anointed eyes. "What angel wakes me from my flowery bed?" she cried, hearing Bottom's braying voice, and then seeing him in all his hairy, long-eared glory. Bottom acknowledged the greeting of the Fairy Queen, and then continued with his song, for he was not a man easily amazed. "I pray thee, gentle mortal, sing again," begged Titania, and, helpless with admiration, confessed to the donkey-eared Bottom that she loved him at first sight. "Methinks, mistress, you should have little reason for that," said Bottom in all honesty, and went on to express a wish to find his way out of the wood. But that was not to be. "Thou shalt remain here," commanded Titania, "whether thou wilt or no. I am a spirit of no common rate," she declared, rising from her couch in all her strange beauty and majesty, "and I do love thee. Therefore, go with me." Bottom bowed his long-eared head in courteous assent, and bright Titania awarded him 4 gossamer sprites to tend upon him and supply his every want. So Bottom, whom nothing could surprise, for though he had an ass's head, he had a rare soul, went affably with the Fairy Queen, while the 4 sprites waited on his smallest command. He bore himself like a monarch. These matters Puck reported to his master, who nodded, well pleased by the grotesque punishment that had been visited on his disobedient queen. "But hast thou," he asked, "yet latched the Athenian's eyes with the love-juice, as I did bid thee do?" "I took him sleeping," promised Puck. "That is finished too." Even as he said it, Demetrius and Hermia came into the glade. "Stand close," murmured Oberon, dissolving into a kind of mist. "This is the same Athenian." "This is the woman," agreed Puck, thinning by his master's side. "But not this the man." Puck had blundered. Demetrius still loved Hermia, who still loved Lysander, who now, by reason of Puck's mistake, loved Helena, who therefore must still love where she was despised. "See me no more!" cried small dark Hermia, wearied and distressed by the unwanted Demetrius. And she plunged away in pursuit of her lost Lysander. Demetrius gazed after her in despair. "There's no following her in this fierce vein," he sighed regretfully, and, overcome with weariness from the chase, lay down to rest. "What hast thou done?" demanded Oberon, vexed by his servant's error. "About the wood go swifter than the wind, and Helena of Athens look thou find." The goblin vanished, and Oberon softly approached the sleeping Demetrius. "When his love he doth espy, let her shine," he whispered, anointing the sleeper's eyes with the liquor of the purple flower. "When thou wakest, if she be by, beg of her for remedy." Even as this was done, Puck returned, leading in his invisible wake the melancholy Helena, who, in her turn, was followed by the eye-bewitched Lysander. Demetrius awoke, opened his charmed eyes, saw Helena, and straightway fell madly, wildly in love with her. No sooner had he declared himself than Hermia returned, and there followed a scene of such frantic confusion, such anger, such reproach, Such accusation and denial, such brandishing of fists and flashing of eyes, such wounding with words and breaking of hearts, that had there been mortal eyes to watch, they would have made a waterfall of tears, instead of glinting with merriment at love's calamity. "Lord, what fools these mortals be," chuckled Puck, as the four lovers raved and ranted and wept in the moonlit glade. "You juggler! You canker-blossom!" shouted Hermia, maddened by the very sight of Helena, once without a lover and now the undeserving possessor of two. "You thief of love!" "Have you no modesty, no maiden shame?" wondered Helena, tottering like a stricken willow before the injustice of Hermia's reproach. "You puppet, you!" "Puppet!" shrieked Hermia, mortified by so unkind a reference to her brevity of inches. "Thou painted maypole!" "Oh, let her not hurt me!" screeched Helena, skipping like a timid doe behind Demetrius and Lysander, as Hermia flew at her with upraised nails. "She was a vixen when she went to school." The quarrel leaped and blazed. Spiders, beetles, serpents, and distracted birds fled from the heated scene, and the passions of the four lovers could no longer be confined within the pressing limits of the glade. Demetrius and Lysander, unable to endure each other's existence for an instant more, reached for their swords and rushed away in search of plainer ground, where they might make fountains with each other's blood. The two ladies, thus abandoned in the moonlight, and panting from their recent exertions, eyed each other with strong dislike and deep distrust. Then first one, and then the other, retreated and vanished into darkness, to seek kindness and security among the less wild beasts that might inhabit the wood. "This is thy negligence," accused Oberon, coming out from leaves and regarding his henchman with disfavour. "Still thou mistakest, or else committ'st thy knaveries wilfully." "Believe me, King of Shadows, I mistook," protested Puck, whose goblin heart had, none the less, been gladdened by the sight of the crossed and crossing lovers. The fourfold enmity that had sprung from a single misplaced love had furnished him with much salty delight. But now it was to be ended. Oberon commanded Puck to prevent the coming battle between Lysander and Demetrius, and then to undo the harm that magic had done with magic again. While Puck was so employed, he would find the donkey-doting Titania and gain his chief object, which was to take her Indian boy. Up and down, cried Puck, who foresaw as much confusion in undoing confusion as in making it. "I will lead them up and down." Away he sped into the wood, where first he found Lysander, baffled by thicket, ditch and moonshine, shouting for his enemy and waving his sword wherever there was space to do so. "Where art thou, proud Demetrius?" "Here, villain, drawn and ready," answered Puck, in Demetrius's voice. "I'll be with thee straight," swore Lysander, and went off as round about as Puck could lead him, fighting with bushes, branches and shadows every step of the way. Next, he taunted Demetrius with Lysander's voice, then back to Lysander, then Demetrius again, then with goblin speed to furious Lysander. He was here, he was there, he was in front, he was behind, he was everywhere, he was nowhere. "Follow my voice," he called, and follow it the maddened lovers did, until the wood was filled with shouts and cries and grunts and gasps, and the glitter of swords as they slashed at moonbeams and pierced the dark. Then, little by little, the passionate enemies grew slower in their motions. Their limbs ached, and their bright swords, no longer flashing, helped them like sticks or crutches on their weary way. At length, first one and then the other tottered into the very glade from which they'd set out, and, unaware of each other, thankfully lay down and went to sleep. "Oh, weary night! Oh, long and tedious night!" wailed Helena, straying upon the scene and seeing nothing but her own sadness. Her heart was broken. She sighed and sank down upon the grass and prayed for sleep. "Yet but three?" cried Puck, examining with interest the unconscious contents of the glade. "Come one more, two of both kinds makes up four." "I can no further crawl, no further go," sobbed Hermia, shredded alike by misery and briar. "Here will I rest me till the break of day." and she joined the 3 sleepers to make up the goblins' 4. "Sleep sound," whispered Puck, and darting forward, squeezed the fateful juice into Lysander's dreaming eyes. "When thou wakest," he promised, "thou takest true delight in the sight of thy former lady's eye." He vanished, leaving the 4 strewn upon the grass like fallen warriors on love's battlefield. "Come, sit thee down upon this flowery bed," begged the Fairy Queen, marvellous in the moonlight, "while I thy amiable cheeks do coy, and kiss thy fair, large ears." Bottom, sturdy, donkey-headed Bottom, brayed with pleasure and with dignity, submitted himself to Titania's embrace. Crowned and wreathed, and stuck all over with admiring roses, Bottom laid himself down upon Titania's couch, while his attendant sprites scratched him and tickled him and supplied his every want. Presently, the weariness of endlessly fulfilled desires overcame him. "I have," he declared with a yawn, "an exposition of sleep come upon me." "Sleep thou," murmured the Fairy Queen. "Oh, how I love thee! How I dote on thee!" So Bottom slumbered, and his loud snores made a thunderous lullaby that soon lulled Titania and her court into sleep. Sleep. The glade was filled with it, and the very moonlight seemed to dream. Bushes nodded, and flowers turned and dozed, as Oberon and his henchmen came softly among them. The King of Shadows, having obtained the Indian boy, looked down with pity on his bewitched queen. "I will undo this hateful imperfection of her eyes," he whispered, and doing so, with the juice of another herb, bade Titania wake. "My Oberon," she cried, "what visions have I seen? Methought I was enamoured of an ass." "There lies your love," said Oberon, and Titania gazed appalled upon the vision of flowery, snoring, donkey-headed Bottom. "How came these things to pass?" she demanded, but Oberon smiled and shook his head. Then, bidding Puck restore Bottom to his human state, he took Titania by the hand and led her dancing from the sleeping scene. The sounds of hounds and horn came winding through the wood. Duke Theseus and his future queen were out upon the morning's hunt. Presently, the royal riders entered the glade and gazed down in wonderment upon the sleepers. "My lord, this is my daughter here asleep," cried Hermia's father, who was of the company. Seeing how things were, he demanded that the full rigour of the law should be visited directly on his truant child. But when the lovers were awakened, all could see that either by magic, witchcraft, or merely by true love finding out true heart, which must be magical enough, each now loved where he should, and each was beloved by whom she would. So the angry father was overruled. It was a day of forgiveness. It was Duke Theseus's wedding day. "In the temple, by and by with us," he decreed, "these couples shall eternally be knit." So Hermia and Lysander, Demetrius and happy Helena, winding arms and linking looks and smiles, followed the Duke and his company out of the glade, all spite and anger, all tears and heartbreak, having faded into the semblance of a dream. "When my cue comes, call me and I will answer." Bottom awoke. He was alone. He scratched his head and, to his great relief, found that it was the proper head for Bottom. He shook it. It was indeed the selfsame head he'd had for as long as he could remember, and yet there was a difference. There was a dream inside it, a dream of such brightness that Bottom, when he thought about it, shone like a star in boots. He smiled, and it was a rare smile, for Bottom, of all mortals, had walked, waking, in the kingdom of dreams. "I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream," he decided. "It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom." With that, he went back to the town where his companions greeted him with relief and joy. Now the play could go forward, for Bottom was come among them again, and none but Bottom could ever have played Pyramus. Their pensions were certain, and for bully Bottom, as Flute the bellows mender put it, 6pence a day in Pyramus or nothing. That very day, the Duke and his Queen and the 2 pairs of lovers were married with due solemnity, and that night the tragedy of Pyramus and Thisbe was enacted before them with all the delicacy, wit and grace that Peter Quince and his company could command. Snug the joiner played the lion to perfection, and Snout the tinker rose to great heights as the wall. Starveling the tailor shone in the necessary part of the Man in the Moon, and Flute was a Thisbe to wring all hearts. But Bully Bottom the weaver was best of all. He lived Pyramus. He died Pyramus, and lived again to take his bow, so powerfully that there was not, as they say, a dry eye in the house, although whether the tears shed were of grief or of laughter, none could say. The play done, the married lovers went their ways to bed. For a little while the hall was empty. Then Puck and Oberon and Titania, with all their gossamer train, came with glowworm lamps to bless the house and bid good night.
Shakespeare Today by Dr. Rex Gibson. Shakespeare is alive today. Although William Shakespeare the man lies long buried in Stratford-upon-Avon parish church, he lives on in countless millions of hearts and minds. Imagine that cold April day in 1616. The small funeral procession labours slowly along Church Street. Huge black horses draw the wooden cart bearing the simple coffin. On the coffin, a few daffodils and primroses, plucked only minutes before from the garden of New Place, gravely nod with each jolt and jar of the rutted road. Most of Stratford's citizens have turned out, muffled against the biting wind, to see the last appearance of their wealthy neighbour. You couldn't call it a crowd, just small respectful groups clustering the dry places on the roadside, careful to avoid the mud splashed up by the great hooves of the lumbering horses. Men and women briefly bow their heads as the dead man and the black-clad mourners pass. The townspeople share their opinions, as neighbours do. He used to do some acting, didn't he? Made a lot of money in London, writing plays, I think. Used to come home once a year to see his family, but nobody here really knew a lot about Master Shakespeare. Wasn't he a poet? Big landowner hereabouts, anyway. All those fields over at Wilcombe. Past the Guild Chapel, where he had worshipped as a boy, past the school where long ago his imagination was fired by language. At the churchyard gate, under the sad elms, 6 men effortlessly heave the coffin onto their shoulders. William Shakespeare is about to enter his parish church for the last time. Nobody at that long-ago funeral guessed that they were saying goodbye to a man who would become the most famous Englishman of his age, perhaps of all time. Shakespeare lives on. He weaves familiar themes into his tales, the conflicts between parents and children, love at first sight, the power struggles of war and politics. His language is heard everywhere. If you ever call someone a blinking idiot, or a tower of strength, or describe them as tongue-tied, or suffering from green-eyed jealousy, or being dead as a doornail, you are speaking the language of Shakespeare. If you say, it was Greek to me, or parting is such sweet sorrow, or that something is too much of a good thing, and that you have not slept one wink, the words of Shakespeare are alive in your mouth. Shakespeare's language has a power all of its own, rich in emotional intensity. Because he was a poet who wrote plays, he could make even the simplest words utterly memorable. All around the world people know Hamlet's line, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Shakespeare is still performed today because of the electrifying power of his storytelling. Whether his story is about love or murder or kings and queens, he keeps you on the edge of your seat wanting to know what happens next. He created well over 900 characters in his plays. However large or small the part, each character springs vividly to life in performance. They live in our imagination because they are so much like people today. They experience the same emotions that everyone feels and recognizes: love, jealousy, fear, courage, ambition, pride, and 100 others. In every play, Shakespeare invites us to imagine what the characters are like. And for nearly 400 years, people have accepted Shakespeare's invitation. The plays have been reimagined in very many ways. They have been shortened, added to, and set in very different periods of history. They have been translated into many languages and performed all over the world. Shakespeare lives because all persons in every age and every society can make their own interpretations and performances of Shakespeare. You too can make your own living Shakespeare. Try reading the play either by yourself, changing your voice to suit the different characters, or with friends, and record it on a tape recorder. If you have a toy theatre, try staging it with characters and scenery that you make and paint yourself. Or collect together a cast and create your own production for your family and friends.